There's something people don't talk about enough when it comes to modern relationships. They say, women want one thing, men want another. In the middle, nobody's happy. But after spending years working with people from all walks of life, helping them navigate the turbulent waters of dating and connection, I've come to realize something profound. The story we tell ourselves about what's broken might be the very thing preventing us from finding what we're looking for. Let me take you back to where this all began for me. Picture a young man in his early 20s, freshly embarking on a career that seemed almost accidental. I never set out to become someone who would eventually work with hundreds of thousands of people, them understand themselves and their relationships better. It just happened organically, one conversation at a time, insight building upon another, until suddenly I looked up and realized this had become my life's work. Landscape has shifted dramatically over these years. When I first started, the internet was a different place. Social media was in its infancy. Dating websites existed, but they carried a certain stigma. People whispered about using them, almost embarrassed to admit they'd created a profile. Fast forward to today, and that shame has evaporated entirely. Now it's just expected. Everyone's on the apps. They might complain about them endlessly, talk about how exhausting the whole process is, how they'd rather meet someone organically. But they're still there swiping away, hoping the next profile might be the one. Change isn't just the technology, though. It's something deeper that reaches into how we perceive ourselves and what we believe we deserve. I've noticed a particular pattern emerging, especially among successful women. They've built impressive careers, achieved financial independence to positions of power and influence. And now they're asking a question that seems straightforward on the surface, but reveals something complex underneath. They want to know how to find someone who matches their level. At first glance, this seems reasonable. You've worked hard, accomplished great things. Why wouldn't you want a partner who's done the same? But here's where it gets interesting. When you dig deeper into what that really means, you start to see the trap, because often what people are really saying is they want someone who earns as much or more than they do with equivalent professional status, someone who moves in the same elite circles. And I always want to ask, isn't the whole point of achieving financial security so that you never need someone else for that? Isn't the freedom that comes with success supposed to liberate you to choose based on what actually matters? Character, kindness, how someone shows up for you when life gets difficult. These things don't require a certain income bracket. They don't come with a prestigious job title. I've sat in rooms with incredibly accomplished women, kind who've built businesses that changed industries, who negotiate million-dollar deals before lunch. And one of the first questions they ask me is about finding someone at their level. And I understand the concern beneath the question. They're worried about intimidation, about finding a man whose ego can handle being with someone powerful. Sometimes I think we've narrowed the definition of power so much that we miss what actually creates attraction and connection. Think about what draws people together in the first place. It's rarely just status or money, though we've convinced ourselves otherwise. Real attraction, the kind that sustains itself over years and decades, comes from something more fundamental. It's about how someone makes you feel seen, understood, challenged in good ways, supported when you need it. The problem is we're living in an age of infinite comparison. Never before in human history have we had such immediate access to curated versions of everyone else's lives. We scroll through feeds of people on eternal vacations, posing next to luxury cars, dining at restaurants we can't pronounce the names of. And gradually, without even realizing it, we start to believe this is normal. We think our lives should look like this too. I remember seeing photos recently of autumn in a particular region, and the colors were so vivid they almost hurt to look at. These deep pinks and oranges that seemed impossible. And when I looked at the comments, person after person who actually lived there was saying the same thing. It's beautiful here, they'd write, but it doesn't look like this. These colors don't exist in nature. Someone enhanced them, manipulated the reality until it became something fantastical. And that's what's happening with dating, with relationships, with our expectations of what life should be. We're chasing an enhanced version that nobody can actually achieve. Then we wonder why we're disappointed when reality doesn't measure up to the filtered images we've been fed. This extends to how we present ourselves too. The tools we have now to alter our appearance are extraordinary. You can change your face shape, smooth your skin, adjust your proportions, all with a few taps on a screen. And what this creates is a strange homogenization. Everyone starts to look vaguely similar, all pursuing the same narrow standard of beauty that's trending at the moment. What happened with globalization, how every town started to look the same once the same chain stores moved in everywhere. Except now it's happening with people. We're globalizing appearance, and in the process, losing what makes each person uniquely interesting. For men, there's a parallel trap. Scroll through certain corners of the internet, and you'll see this relentless message that what women really want is wealth and status symbols. Photos of men leaning against expensive cars, private jets in the background, designer everything. And yes, that appeals to some people. But here's what that messaging misses. If you build your entire identity around impressing others with material success, you're going to attract people who care primarily about material success. And that's a recipe for profound unhappiness. I learned this lesson early, though I didn't recognize it at the time for what it was. There was a period when I tried being vulnerable in a relationship, really open about my insecurities and fears, and it backfired spectacularly. The person I was with looked at me differently afterward, and not in a good way. There was this subtle shift in how they related to me. I'd revealed something that made me less attractive in their eyes. At the time, I drew completely the wrong conclusion. I decided vulnerability was dangerous, that honesty beyond a certain point was a mistake. I told myself I'd never be that open again. What I eventually realized was that I hadn't been wrong to be vulnerable. I'd just been vulnerable with the wrong person who wasn't ready or capable of handling that level of intimacy. And this is something I see play out constantly. Men who've been burned when they opened up, who learned to keep everything locked down because one time, maybe twice, they showed their real feelings and the person they were with couldn't deal with it. So they carry this around, this belief that women say they want vulnerability, but really they want someone who never shows weakness. But that's not universally true. Women actually want, and what men want too, if we're being honest, is someone who can be real with them, not someone who dumps every anxious thought and insecurity on them constantly, using them as an unpaid therapist. There's a difference between vulnerability and neediness. Vulnerability is saying, here's something I struggle with. Here's a part of me that isn't perfect, and I'm working on it. That's powerful. That creates intimacy. Neediness is making your struggles someone else's problem to solve, demanding constant reassurance, refusing to take responsibility for your own emotional state. And people can smell that difference immediately. The challenge is that we learn the wrong lessons from our experiences. A man gets vulnerable with the wrong woman and decides all women punish vulnerability. A woman dates someone who can't handle her success and decides all men are intimidated by powerful women. Specific experiences with specific people and blow them up into universal truths, then wonder why we can't find what we're looking for. I think about the conversations I've had over the years, the patterns that emerge when you talk to enough people. Women tell me they want men to open up more, to communicate, to share what they're feeling. They're tired of trying to decode silence, guessing what's going on inside their partner's head. And I believe them. That longing for emotional connection is real. But then men tell me they tried that and it ended badly. They opened up and suddenly they weren't attractive anymore. They became less in their partner's eyes. And I believe them too. That experience is real. So what's the truth? The truth is we're all looking for the right kind of person who matches us, not just in external accomplishments, but in emotional maturity. That's much harder to find than someone with the right job title. There's this test I think about sometimes to gauge whether someone is actually ready for a real relationship. It's simple, but revealing. Can they handle you at your most human? Not your carefully curated best self, you on a Tuesday when work was terrible and you're stressed about money and you snapped at them for something minor. Can they meet that with compassion rather than contempt? Because here's what nobody tells you about long-term relationships. The person you're with is going to see everything. Every insecurity, every flaw, every moment when you're less than your best self. If you're with someone who needs you to be impressive all the time, you're going to exhaust yourself trying to maintain that image. If you find someone who loves you precisely because they know all of it and stay anyway, that's when you've found something worth keeping. I remember talking to someone once who said something that stuck with me. She mentioned that when she met someone new, she was immediately drawn to their chin dimple, thought it was adorable. But then she added that it wasn't quite as adorable as her daughter's cheek dimples. In one sentence, she'd managed to be flirtatious while also casually mentioning she was a mother. No heavy explanation, no worried disclaimers about baggage, confident acknowledgement of her reality. Compare that to people who approach the same information like it's a confession to be worried about or apologized for. How do I tell someone I have kids? How do I explain this part of my past? As if these normal human experiences are shameful secrets rather than just parts of who they are. The way we carry our stories matters immensely. If you treat your life like it's full of problems someone will have to overlook to be with you. Don't be surprised when people see you that way. If you treat your experiences, even the challenging ones, as things that shaped you into someone interesting and resilient, others will see that too. This connects to something I've observed about online dating specifically. The profiles that work genuinely attract quality people aren't the ones listing demands or trying to screen out problems before they happen. You know the type. Must be this tall. Must earn this much. No casual hookups. Must want kids. Must have your life together. It's understandable why people write these things. They've been hurt before, disappointed, wasted time on people who wanted different things. Try to control the process by being very specific about requirements. But here's what that communicates. It says, I'm frustrated, I'm jaded, I've been through this before, and I'm trying to protect myself. And while that's a natural response to disappointment, it's not attractive. It doesn't make someone want to get to know you. The profiles that work are the ones that reveal personality, show rather than tell. There was one I came across years ago that I still remember. The prompt asked about disappointments. The person wrote that their biggest disappointment was that their future children would never get to experience walking around a video rental store on a weekend night, picking out movies as a family. Think about what that accomplished. It was endearing, showed a nostalgic side without being maudlin, revealed that they wanted children someday without making it seem heavy or demanding. It was specific enough that anyone reading it could imagine the scene, connect to it emotionally. That's the kind of thing that makes someone want to know more about you. But most people approach their profiles like resumes or worse, warning labels. And then they wonder why they're not getting quality matches. The truth is, dating apps have fundamentally changed how we approach relationships, but maybe not in the ways we think. Yes, they've made it easier to meet people, to find potential matches we'd never cross paths with otherwise. Also created this consumer mentality where people are shopping for partners the way they shop for products, through enough options, and eventually you'll find exactly what you want, right? Except people aren't products, and the paradox of choice is real. When you have seemingly infinite options, you become pickier about things that don't actually matter while missing the qualities that do. You'll reject someone because they made one grammatical error in their profile, or because they're half an inch shorter than your preferred height, never giving yourself the chance to discover that they're kind and funny and would challenge you to be better. I've seen this play out in fascinating ways. The same people who complain that dating apps are terrible, that all the good ones are taken, nobody wants anything real anymore. They're often the ones being incredibly rigid about superficial criteria. And when you point this out gently, suggest that maybe they're optimizing for the wrong things, they get defensive. Because admitting that would mean acknowledging their own role in their dating struggles. It's much easier to blame the apps, blame the culture, blame the opposite sex, than to look honestly at your own choices and patterns. Here's something I've learned that I wish more people understood. Qualities that create initial attraction and the qualities that sustain a long-term relationship are often completely different. That spark, chemistry people talk about like it's the ultimate indicator of compatibility, it's wildly overrated. Don't misunderstand me. You need some level of physical attraction, some baseline of desire. But chemistry alone tells you almost nothing about whether this person would make a good partner. I've seen people with incredible chemistry destroy each other. And I've seen couples who started as friends, where the attraction built slowly, create relationships that lasted decades. Chemistry gets you attention. It makes someone want to spend time with you, makes the early dates exciting. But attention isn't intention, because we can't keep their hands off you doesn't mean they're thinking about a future with you. And intention without investment is just empty words. Can say all the right things about wanting a relationship while their actions tell a completely different story. This is one of the biggest mistakes people make in early dating. They mistake intensity for depth. Someone pursues them hard, texts constantly, wants to see them all the time, and they interpret this as love or serious interest. Then they're shocked when that same person vanishes just as suddenly, or reveals they're not actually looking for anything serious. What they missed was the difference between someone who's excited by the chase and someone who's ready for commitment. And that distinction becomes clear pretty quickly if you're paying attention to actions rather than getting lost in feelings. Tell people to watch for consistency. Does this person do what they say they'll do? Do they make plans and follow through? When things difficult or inconvenient, do they stick around or do they disappear? These are the real indicators of whether someone's serious, not how intense the chemistry feels or how much they text you. And speaking of texting, here's something that trips people up constantly. They meet someone they like, exchange numbers, and then they just text back and forth for weeks without actually meeting. Building this elaborate fantasy of who this person is based on text conversations. Then when they finally meet, reality doesn't match the fantasy they created, and everyone's disappointed. If you're genuinely interested in someone, suggest meeting relatively quickly, not in a pushy way, but just direct. I enjoyed talking with you. Let's grab coffee this week. Lower the stakes. Make it easy for them to say yes. 30-minute coffee is much less intimidating than a dinner that might stretch into an awkward 3-hour ordeal if the chemistry isn't there in person. And here's another thing. The best first dates aren't the ones where you're sitting across from each other at a table, making intense eye contact the whole time. That's pressure. That's an interview, not a date. Better to do something where you're side by side, where you can look at each other when you want to, but also have other things to focus on. Walking somewhere interesting, sitting at a bar rather than at a table, something where the conversation can flow naturally rather than feeling forced. Learn this from watching how people actually interact when they're comfortable. They're not usually facing each other straight on. They're doing something together, looking at the world together and turning toward each other when they want to connect. That's the natural rhythm of human bonding. But beyond first date mechanics, there's a bigger question about what we're actually looking for. And I think a lot of people haven't done the work to figure this out honestly. They know what society says they should want. They know what their friends would approve of. They know what looks good on paper. But do they know what would actually make them happy? Because those aren't always the same thing. You might think you want someone with a prestigious career, only to discover that person works 80-hour weeks and you never see them. You might think you want someone traditionally attractive, only to find that conventionally beautiful people often have very different life experiences and perspectives than you do, and you don't actually connect. The people I've seen build the happiest relationships are the ones who got really clear on their values first. Not their preferences, but their values. What actually matters to you in how someone treats people, how they handle adversity, what they find funny, how they see the world. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. Sometimes getting clear on your values means admitting that the life you thought you wanted isn't actually what you want. Maybe you've been pursuing a certain type of person because that's what's supposed to be attractive, but it doesn't actually light you up. Maybe you've been optimizing your own life for impressing others rather than for your own fulfillment. These are hard realizations to come to. I know because I've been through them myself. There was a long period of my life where I was working relentlessly, building a career, achieving visible success. And from the outside, it looked great. People were impressed. Opportunities kept coming. But inside, I felt disconnected from it all. Like I was watching my own life from the outside rather than actually living it. I couldn't articulate what was wrong for the longest time. Everything was going well by any objective measure. I was helping people, making a difference, financially secure, respected in my field. Why wasn't I happy? It took me an embarrassingly long time to realize I needed help. Therapy wasn't something I ever considered for myself. That was for other people, people with obvious problems. I was fine. I was functional. I was successful. What would I even talk about in therapy? There was this persistent numbness, this feeling that I was going through the motions of a life that should have been fulfilling, but somehow wasn't. And eventually, it got bad enough that I couldn't ignore it anymore. I didn't realize was that I'd spent so many years focused entirely on external achievement, on reaching a point of security and stability. I'd never done any internal work. I'd never processed experiences that needed processing. I'd never examined beliefs and patterns I'd developed growing up that were still running my life without my conscious awareness. All of that unexamined material was manifesting in ways I didn't connect at first. Physical pain that wouldn't go away no matter what I tried. Chronic stress that I couldn't trace to any specific cause. A kind of low-level anxiety that colored everything. The work of dealing with that, really dealing with it, rather than just managing symptoms, was harder than anything I'd done professionally. Because you can't just work harder at internal growth the way you can at external achievement. You have to slow down. You have to sit with uncomfortable things. You have to be willing to look at parts of yourself you've been avoiding. I remember sitting in a therapist's office one day and hearing myself say that I'd accepted I might never be happy again. The physical pain I was dealing with was so constant and overwhelming that happiness just wasn't accessible to me anymore. Decided to just live for other people, to find meaning in helping them, even if I couldn't find it for myself. And I remember the therapist looking at me very seriously and saying, "That's depression. What you just described is clinical depression." And that word had never been part of my vocabulary for myself. I didn't think of myself as someone who struggled with mental health. I was the person who had it together, who other people came to for help. But hearing it named was weirdly both terrifying and relieving. Terrifying because it made it real. Relieving because it meant I wasn't just weak or failing somehow. This was a thing that happened to people and there were ways to address it. The journey out of that period wasn't quick or straightforward. It involved therapy, yes, but also a complete reassessment of how I was living. What I was prioritizing, stories I was telling myself about who I had to be and what I had to achieve. And gradually, things started to shift. Pain that had been this omnipresent thing started to ease. Not all at once, not completely, but enough that I could function differently. Enough that I could start to feel connected to my life again rather than just observing it. One of the most profound realizations through all of this was understanding how much of our suffering comes not from the things that happen to us, from our relationship with those things, the story we tell about them, the meaning we assign. The pain I was experiencing was real. It had a physical component that wasn't just in my head, but my emotional response to it, my catastrophizing about what it meant for my future, my resistance to accepting it, that was amplifying everything exponentially. When I learned to change my relationship with the pain, accept its presence without making it mean my life was over, something remarkable happened. It became manageable. Not gone, no longer the defining feature of my existence. And I think this applies to so much of what we struggle with. Heartbreak is real and painful. The story we tell about what that heartbreak means about us, about our future, about whether we'll ever find love again, that determines whether we process it and move forward or get stuck in it for years. Rejection from a job or a relationship or anything else is real, whether we interpret that as evidence that we're fundamentally flawed or simply as evidence that this particular situation wasn't right. That shapes our entire experience and what we do next. This is why I get so concerned when I see people, especially young people, absorbing messages about dating and relationships that are fundamentally disempowering. This idea that everything is terrible, that all men are one way or all women are another way, that the statistics are against you, so why bother trying? Because here's the thing about statistics. They describe populations, not individuals. The fact that a certain percentage of people struggle with something doesn't determine your personal experience. If you learn how to show up well in relationships, how to be emotionally available while maintaining boundaries, how to choose wisely and invest appropriately, your outcomes can be completely different from the average. Saying most businesses fail, so there's no point starting one. Well, yes, most businesses fail because most people don't know what they're doing, don't have a clear plan, don't adapt when things aren't working. If you study what makes businesses succeed and apply those principles, your odds improve dramatically. Relationships are the same. If you're just fumbling through based on instinct and hoping for the best, yeah, you'll probably have the average experience, which isn't great. If you actually learn about attachment styles, communication, emotional regulation, if you work on yourself and choose partners who've done the same, you can create something extraordinary. The problem is we treat relationships like they should just work naturally if we find the right person. There's someone out there who'll be so perfect for us that we won't have to try, won't have to grow, have to navigate difficult moments. And that's a fantasy. Every relationship, even the best ones, requires work. Not miserable, grinding work, but the work of staying connected, of continuing to choose each other, of evolving together rather than growing apart. I think about my own relationship now, And one of the things I'm most grateful for is that I can be completely myself. The parts of me I used to think were too much or not enough, the vulnerabilities I learned to hide, all of it is welcomed, creates a safety I didn't know was possible. But that didn't happen by accident. It happened because both of us did our own work first. We came to the relationship as people who'd examined our patterns, worked through our wounds, developed emotional literacy. We continue to do that work together. There's this notion that gets thrown around that familiarity breeds contempt. The longer you're with someone, the more the spark fades. And while that can happen, it's not inevitable. Familiarity can also breed deep intimacy, the kind where you know someone so thoroughly that you can communicate without words, where you've built a shared world together that no one else can access. But maintaining desire alongside that intimacy, that's the great challenge of long-term relationships. Because desire exists in space, in mystery, in the distance between two people. And as you build a life together, as you become more familiar, that space naturally shrinks. This is why it matters that both people maintain their own identities, their own interests, their own growth, not as a strategy to manipulate attraction, but because you're still individuals. You still need to be someone outside of just being someone's partner. When you lose yourself completely in a relationship, when your entire identity becomes wrapped up in being half of a couple, that's when things start to stagnate. There's nothing new to discover about each other because neither of you is doing anything interesting independently. When you're both continuing to evolve, to pursue things that matter to you, to have experiences and grow, you keep bringing new things to the relationship. You get to observe each other in different contexts, see each other through fresh eyes. I think about times when I've gone out with my partner to some social event and I get to watch how others respond to her, see her through their eyes for a moment. And there's something about that external perspective that reignites attraction. You remember, oh, right, this person is impressive and interesting, not just to me, but objectively. I'm lucky to be with them. Beyond these mechanics of maintaining long-term relationships, I think the deeper question is about what we're building toward. Because at some point, you have to decide what kind of life you actually want, not what you think you should want. And this is hard because we're surrounded by messages about what success looks like, the career achievements, the lifestyle markers, the relationship milestones. And it's easy to pursue these things without ever stopping to ask if they're what would actually make you happy. I hit a point where I had to really grapple with this. I could keep scaling up, taking on more projects, reaching more people, making more money. The opportunity was there, but at what cost? And more importantly, why? What was I trying to prove and to whom? My partner and I talk about our future. We keep coming back to this word simplicity. Not simplicity in the sense of having nothing, but simplicity in the sense of being really clear about what matters and structuring our lives around that rather than around what looks impressive or what others expect. For me, the things that matter are my relationships with the people I love, doing work that feels meaningful rather than just lucrative, and having the space and mental peace to actually be present for all of it. That's it. That's what I'm optimizing for now. Getting to that clarity required letting go of a lot of conditioning. The voice that says you should always want more, always be expanding, should never be satisfied with enough. That voice is loud in our culture, especially in places where everyone around you is ambitious and accomplished. You go to a gathering and hear about what everyone else is doing, and there's this pull to compare, to measure yourself against them, to feel like you need to match or exceed what they're achieving. And that's exhausting and ultimately pointless. Because here's what I've learned through painful experience. You can reach every external marker of success and still feel empty. You can have everything you thought you wanted and discover it doesn't deliver the satisfaction you imagined. That's not to say achievement is meaningless, but it's not the same as fulfillment. Real fulfillment comes from alignment, knowing what you value and living accordingly, from building relationships that nourish you, from doing work that feels purposeful, from being able to be yourself without pretense or performance. And the only way to get there is to be ruthlessly honest with yourself about what you actually want versus what you think you should want. To be willing to make choices that might not make sense to others, but that feel right to you. This is especially important when it comes to relationships, because it's very easy to date someone who looks good on paper, who your friends would approve of, who seems like the obvious choice. But if that person doesn't actually make you happy, if being with them feels more like an achievement than a joy, you're building on sand. The relationships that last, deepen over time rather than growing stale, are the ones where both people are there because they genuinely want to be, not because it makes sense or looks right, where they've chosen each other based on values and compatibility rather than checking boxes. That requires being willing to walk away from things that don't serve you, even when they're objectively good things, even when other people would kill to have what you have. If it's not right for you, it's not right. I think about the people I know who've built the happiest lives, and they're not always the ones with the most impressive achievements or the most enviable circumstances. They're the ones who figured out what mattered to them and had the courage to pursue that, even when it meant disappointing others or choosing a less traveled path. One person I know could have kept climbing the corporate ladder, making more money, kept accumulating status. Instead, they stepped back to focus on family and personal projects that brought them joy. And everyone thought they were crazy for turning down the opportunities they were being offered. They're genuinely happy in a way they never were when they were grinding for the next promotion. Another person walked away from a relationship that looked perfect from the outside because something fundamental was missing. And they took enormous grief from people who couldn't understand why they'd give up someone so great. But they knew and they trusted that, knowing even when they couldn't fully articulate it to others. These are the people I admire because of what they've achieved, but because of their clarity and courage. And I think this connects back to dating and relationships in an important way. Because if you're not clear on what you want, on what would actually make you happy, you're going to keep making choices based on external validation. You're going to date people who impress others rather than people who genuinely connect with you. You're going to stay in relationships that look right but feel wrong. Getting clear requires introspection. It requires being willing to sit with questions that don't have easy answers. What do I actually value? What makes me feel alive? What kind of person brings out the best in me? What am I willing to sacrifice and what am I not? And here's the uncomfortable truth. Sometimes getting clear on what you want means realizing you've been pursuing the wrong things. That the life you've been building isn't actually the life you want. And then you have to decide whether to keep going down a path that isn't serving you or to make a change, even if that change is scary and uncertain. I've had to make those choices multiple times. Early in my career, I was doing work that was successful, but didn't fulfill me. And I had to decide whether to keep doing what was working or to pivot towards something that felt more meaningful, even if it was riskier. The pivot was terrifying, but it led to work I'm genuinely passionate about. In relationships, I've had to learn to recognize when something isn't right, even when there's nothing obviously wrong. Subtle misalignment where you like someone, they like you, everything should work, but something crucial is missing. Having the honesty to acknowledge that rather than trying to force it. These choices are never easy, but they're essential because the alternative is sleepwalking through life, checking boxes, meeting expectations, waking up one day wondering how you ended up somewhere you never wanted to be. I see this happen to people all the time. Choices incrementally, each one seeming reasonable in the moment, they look up 10 years later and don't recognize their own life. The job they thought would be temporary became permanent. The relationship they knew wasn't quite right became a marriage. The city they were only staying in for a year became home. And none of these things are bad in themselves. But if they're not actively chosen, if they're just what happened by default, often this underlying dissatisfaction that people can't quite name. This is why I'm such a believer in regular check-ins with yourself. Taking time to step back from the momentum of daily life and ask, is this still what I want? Am I moving towards something that matters to me or just moving because standing still feels uncomfortable? These questions are especially important in the context of relationships and family planning because the decisions you make about whether to have children, when to have them, who to have them with, these are among the most consequential choices you'll ever make. And yet, people often make them almost passively, going with the flow until suddenly it's too late or they're locked into something they're not sure they wanted. I know women who always knew they wanted children, but kept postponing it, assuming there would be time later. They focused on career, on travel, waiting for the perfect circumstances or the perfect partner. And then one day they're 40 and single and realizing the window has closed or is rapidly closing. And the grief of that is profound. I also know women who had children because it's what you do, what's expected, what everyone else was doing. And they love their children, but there's also this quiet resentment about the life they gave up, the opportunities they can't pursue anymore, the version of themselves they'll never get to be. Both situations are heartbreaking in different ways. And they often come from the same root cause, being honest with yourself about what you actually want and then making active choices based on that clarity. With men, the pattern is often different, but equally problematic. Many men assume they have infinite time, that fertility isn't their concern. They can put off thinking about family until their 40s or 50s. While it's true that men can biologically father children later than women can bear them. That doesn't mean it's without consequence. Older fathers have higher rates of certain health complications in their children. The energy required to parent young children when you're in your 50s is different than in your 30s. Number of years you'll have with your children is fewer. These are real considerations that get ignored because the pressure on men around fertility timing isn't as obvious. Beyond the biological considerations, there's an emotional dimension. I've talked to men in their late 40s who suddenly realize they want a family, but haven't built the kind of life or relationship that would make that possible. They were so focused on career, on experiencing freedom, on not being tied down, they never did the work of becoming someone capable of partnership. And now they want something they're not equipped for. This isn't about judging anyone's choices. People should absolutely have the freedom to live however they want, children or not have children, to marry or stay single. But those choices should be conscious, made with full awareness of the trade offs involved, not stumbled into by default. This is where so much of the cultural messaging right now is actively harmful. When people hear that motherhood is settling, that having children means giving up your dreams, that traditional family structures are oppressive, people internalize that and make choices they later regret. Because here's the reality. For some people, having children is the most meaningful thing they'll ever do. It's not settling. It's not giving up.